So now have the rebels retake it is a very, very significant piece. And Putin is, it is a small step to think that the rebels could also take Tartus and Latakia, the key Russian bases. I think this was quite a smart political move by Zelensky. It's pretty clear that actually the Ukraine forces have been under considerable pressure in the last few weeks and months, particularly down in the Donbass and areas like that. It's also very clear that things are going to change significantly when President Trump takes power on the 20th of January 2025, and he is going to have a major impact on what happens in the war. But also, the Russians are in a bad position too. Only yesterday, the UK Ministry of Defence Intelligence update said that the Russians were losing 2,000 troops a day on the front line, even with support from North Korea. This is just an untenable position over the long time. And I think, hitherto, the view is that Trump will steam in, enforce a ceasefire, and it'll all be over. But actually, it's becoming a bit clearer now with some of the people that Trump is putting into key positions who would have a direct effect on this war, that actually that may not be the case. I think it's also a fact that Russia is firing a lot of ballistic missiles at key infrastructure targets, and that's having a profound effect on Ukraine as well. So when we balance everything up that's happening at the moment and the strategic geopolitical events about to happen and what's happening in the country itself, and one other factor that has really started to become a key factor today is what is happening in Syria, where Russia has a considerable force, with the rebels in northwest Syria have taken the second city of Aleppo, which is remarkable. Now, Russia invested a lot of military hardware and military personnel in Syria because Putin wanted a warm weather port, Tartus, and wanted a major airfield around Latakia to support him. He is now having to divert jets and effort to support President Assad, who he has propped up for the last sort of 12 years. And that is having a huge impact. If his southern flank, as it were, falls apart, then he's in considerable difficulty. So going back to Zelensky's proposal for peace, where actually he would not at this stage try and regain by fighting some of those areas that the Russians have taken since 2014 and 2022, but would be happy with a NATO umbrella. In other words, NATO guaranteeing the security of a ceasefire, and potentially, I think Zelensky's hinting at trading the area that he's captured in Russia in Kursk for areas in Ukraine. Then it sort of, to me, it makes a lot of sense because, if we don't know what Putin's going to say, but if Putin throws this out, which he might well do, then it gives Trump and also NATO sort of carte blanche to really do what they like. And if Trump, and he has threatened that he is going to give Zelensky everything, it could turn out that actually with that sort of support and NATO may well be more confident if Trump gets more involved, that they will as well. And actually, there is a path where you could see that Ukraine could regain all the territory that's lost. So very finely balanced. So I think it is a very clever political move by Zelensky, and I hope it has the desired effect. And this might well embolden NATO as well. There was when British and American and French jets shot down Iranian ballistic missiles fired at Israel, a lot of people thought that would escalate. But actually what it's done is there is now a ceasefire between Hezbollah, who is the Iranian proxy, and it's done quite the converse. and that might well give NATO confidence to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles fired into Ukraine. But when we look at Syria specifically, yeah, I spent many years there um, in the sort of medical health support area, and the thought that the rebels could take Aleppo. Aleppo is a massive city, many millions of people, is extraordinary. Certainly between 2012 and 2019, they were pushed out. I mean, I was witness to the fall of Aleppo to Russian and Syrian forces in 2016, where they absolutely decimated. So now have the rebels retake it is a very significant piece, and Putin is. It is a small step to think that the rebels could also take Tartus and Latakia, the key Russian bases. That is, if they've taken Aleppo, I don't see why this shouldn't happen. And evidently, things have gone very quiet in Syria in the last 4 to 5 years. And one would have thought that Assad and Putin have rather taken their eye off the game. And in that time, the rebels seem to have regrouped. They have certain affiliation to the Turks and others. They have a complex origin because Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, called HTS now, were born out of Al-Qaeda and ISIS to a certain degree. But in about 2016, they tried to distance themselves from the extreme jihadists of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But that is still their background, so it's a difficult piece here. But what they've done is quite remarkable, and it's given Putin a lot of things to think about. And the challenges that the Russians have with what we call their command and control, in other words, how they direct these operations. Everything is done at the highest level. Virtually everything needs Putin's stamp of approval, which means that things happen really slowly. It took 6 to 8 weeks for a counterattack in Kursk after the Ukraine invasion. What is happening in Aleppo now? We've seen Russian jets are attacking, but the rebels are moving forward. So it's giving Putin a real headache. And with Iran not subjugated, but a shadow itself, with the demise of its military wing in this area, Hezbollah, things are stacking up against Putin in quite a major way, which is why with Zelensky's plan, Putin moving into the White House, actually and I would be one who were slightly concerned with a Putin presidency, with a Trump presidency, and a few weeks ago really fearing for what could happen to Ukraine. Well, we're in slightly a different place here now, and if the West holds its nerve, particularly European NATO countries, there is a chance actually that a ceasefire in early next year, early 2025, could be very much to Ukraine's benefit, rather than just a succor to Putin and preventing further Ukraine bloodshed. So things are moving very quickly, and how Putin reacts will really determine what happens, I expect, over the next 4 to 6 weeks. In the West, we sort of think that Putin is immune to his economy and can keep going and just throwing more soldiers into the meat grinder, producing more tanks. But actually, that's not the case. I mean, we're even seeing the Shahed drones that Iran has given to Putin being electronically turned around in flight and flown back to Russia, which sort of shows that Russia is really failing on a lot of fronts. And certainly, there is a level of growing disgruntlement within the Russian sort of civic society that interest rates are plus of 20%, inflation is plus of 20%. There are shortages in the shops, and that is really beginning to hit people. And although Russia pretty much controls its social media and state media to report what Putin and the Kremlin wants, information is getting back now. The bad news is beginning to be heard. And Putin is desperate to avoid what happened with the Afghan campaign in the 1980s, when the mothers of Russia marched on the Kremlin after 17,000 Russian soldiers were killed. Now, again, the UK MOD intelligence update last week put the figure at 700,000 Russian dead and injured thus far. Now, you put that together, you put the failing economy together, you put the fact that it's winter and people can't buy bread in the local supermarket, then that is a recipe for social discourse, even in an autocratic regime like Russia. So absolutely, we in the West need to make sure Ukraine can hang on just a bit longer than Putin can. And we're to use a sort of American football vernacular, we're in the end game, and whoever is standing at the end of the end game will prevail. And we need to make sure it's Ukraine.